Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent, and this is part 2 of the comprehensive codex review. If you've not already listened to my first thoughts video, you may want to start with that. It covers in broad brushstrokes how Space Elves have changed as a faction, and then in part 1 I talked about sub-faction bonuses. So if you want to start with part 2 you can, but I would suggest listening to those other videos first. I will eventually cover Harlequins and Ynnari, but that's not happening until this initial probably 5-part codex review is finished. And in this video, I will be focusing on stratagems, relics, and warlord traits. And then next time, we'll be on to psychic powers and faction-specific secondaries. So here we go, stratagems. If you'd like to follow along, I'm on page 98 of the Aeldari Codex. The first of these is the Great Enemy. We had something like this in the last book too. It allows your Space Elf units in melee with a Slaanesh unit to reroll the hit roll and the wound roll. It's obviously fantastically powerful. There's no game against Slaanesh in which you wouldn't use this almost every turn, and it obviously only matters in games against Slaanesh. Matchless Agility for 1 CP. This has changed. In the last book, this is the stratagem that allowed a unit, any unit, to guarantee an advanced move of 6. It doesn't work that way anymore. Now, when you make a battle focus move, you can guarantee that the battle focus move is a move of 6 inches. So this only applies to units that are moving after they shoot, making a battle focus move after they shoot. It's super powerful. It will make it possible, for example, to pop into a ruin, shoot something, and then reliably battle focus behind the ruin. If you've listened to my other video, you know that when you make a battle focus move covering that crosses any kind of area terrain, you have to subtract 3. So there's a 50% chance that you can't, step into the ruin, shoot something, and step out. And this for 1 CP guarantees it. It has also just fabulous synergy with a variety of units that want to move up the field, like Shining Spears, right? If you want to move with your Shining Spears, you could either advance them, or right, if you do the battle focus move, they shoot something with those catapults, maybe even also the spears, then you get a little more reliable movement range on units that want to be making progress towards the opponent. So really solid stratagem. It's different now, but still very, very strong. Lightning fast reactions. This is down to 1 CP. It does the same thing it always used to do, subtract 1 from an attacker's hit roll. Again, I think you're going to use this a lot. We're going to be leaning into this maybe every turn of the game. -1 to hit really does make a unit significantly more survivable, especially if that stacks with other bonuses like the 5+ invuln that Aspect Warriors have now, or the Andin bonus where you get to shrug off -1 AP and reduce -2. Again, I think to really make most of our units, with the possible exception of the Wraiths, durable, we do have to stack multiple bonuses, but this in combination with something like Fortune also that provides a 5+ Feel No Pain. Super powerful, really good on objective holders, and also just really good on anything that you need to keep alive. Blade Storm for 1 CP. This is fantastic in a shuriken build. So what this does is it allows shuriken weapons in a unit to, on an unmodified hit roll of 6, score an additional hit. This is really, really good. Shuriken fire has improved. It all has a native AP of at least 1 now. Dire Avengers are at a -2. Dire Avengers are also up to Assault 3 instead of Assault 2, so 10 Dire Avengers are putting out 30 shots. And there's another stratagem we're going to talk about later that allows a unit of Dire Avengers to shoot twice in the shooting phase. So if you had a unit of Dire Avengers shooting twice, Blade Storm would work for both times that the Dire Avengers shoot, which is crazy. If you were running a custom Craft World build with Hail of Doom, where 6 is to hit, auto wound, and count as 6 is to wound, suddenly this is insanely good. And I think we're going to need to have this FAQ'd, but it looks like if an unmodified hit roll of 6 scores an additional hit, there's at least an argument for saying that that additional hit was also scored on a 6, in which case it would stack with Hail of Doom such that every time you roll a 6, it's actually 2 auto wounds, both at -3 AP or -4 AP if it's with Dire Avengers, because the way the shuriken rules work now, you just add an additional -2 AP on 6s to wound, and so Avengers start at -2, so on 6s they go to 4. So I mean, this is crazy. Even in a build that's not a shuriken build, if you just have a unit with shuriken catapults firing, and you have, I don't know, more than 6 of the things, this is really good. It's really good. Martial Citizenry. 1 CP. Use the stratagem in your shooting phase or fight phase when a Guardians unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight, and you can reroll attack rolls, or hit rolls of 1, or attack rolls in melee. So this is fabulous for 2 reasons. 1, Guardians got better. So I already mentioned all shuriken catapults have -1 AP now, and they have more range, which we really needed. But also, Wind Riders are Guardians now. They have the Guardian keyword. So you could have some unit like a 5 or 6 Wind Riders. 6 Wind Riders have between them 12 shuriken catapults putting out 24 shots. And so the ability to reroll 1s when they're hitting on 3s is pretty freaking good. Support platforms are also support platforms. So not the platforms that come with Guardians, they obviously already are, but those artillery platforms for D cannons or indirect fire weapons, those too are Guardian units. So if you have a unit of 3 D cannons, all of those D cannons, which hit unbelievably hard, can now reroll 1s to hit. Incidentally, if you combine this with the Ulthway discipline of the Black Guardians, you can have a Guardian Wind Rider or support platform unit hitting on 2s and rerolling 1s for 2 CP. That is really freaking powerful. Yes, theoretically you can use it with Storm Guardians, but you never would because they're not good, sadly. We'll talk about that when we get to the data sheets. Fire and reposition. Also totally solid. So this is 1 CP, and it lets an outcast unit from your army, when they make a battle focus move, not suffer that -3 area terrain penalty. So if Autark, which is theoretically like the Ranger sub-faction, they kind of already get this for free because they ignore movement penalties. And if you listen to my previous video, if I'm right in the way that I'm reading the Autark rule, they already ignore it. But if you're running Rangers from literally any other craft world, this is super useful because they can take a pot shot at something and then duck out of sight. It's going to be really good for Shroud Runners. This is one of the little tricks that I think maybe make Shroud Runners playable competitively. For all that they are this super cool looking hot new model, it's not obvious that they're necessarily going to be able to elbow out the other really good fast attack options, except that they have a couple of pretty awesome stratagem plays, and in particular sub-faction builds, I think they're really going to have some survivability and therefore potentially be really solid. And this is a great trick because a Shroud Runner unit, even though they're jet bikes, they do benefit from cover. They can get the bonus to their armor save. And so the ability to move into a ruin, shoot, and then maybe even drop out of the ruin completely out of line of sight, or make another move and put yourself in a position to just be more durable. It's really good. It has some serious play with those 2 outcast units, the scout units. Avengers of Assyrian for 2 CP. Assyrian. I'm still not sure how we're saying that. In any event, use this stratagem at the end of your shooting phase. Select 1 Dire Avengers unit from your army that's below starting strength. It can shoot again. I mentioned this just a moment ago with Bladestorm. Crazy synergy with Bladestorm. It does cost 3 CP because the shooting again costs 2 CP. I do think this is good, but I also think that you're only going to, because it is 2 CP, not 1 CP, I think you're only going to do this when you have a reasonable number of Dire Avengers left. So, if you're starting with 10 in the unit and you have 6 still alive, it's probably worth doing. If you start with 10 in the unit and you have more than 6 still alive, it definitely is. But some 5-man unit of Avengers that takes a couple of casualties, I don't know if it is worth paying 2 CP to have them shoot again. It really might be, depending on what's going on the board, but it is CP intensive and it's situational. It's certainly pretty expensive to combine it with Bladestorm, but if you can get it on a big unit, super worth it, super powerful. Unparalleled Mastery for 1 CP. this does the same thing it's always done. You can manifest an additional psychic power, but it's not only usable on Farseers, it's also usable on Shadowseers, Yvrain, and the Incarn. The Multifaceted Mind. This is the stratagem that allows one of your Farseers to attempt a psychic action and still cast one power. This is going to be a game changer for us because it's going to open up some of those Warpcraft secondaries in ways that they have not been open to us previously in certain builds. I'm particularly interested in this one for Ulthway builds, because Ulthway has a way to make a power almost definitely not deniable. And so you could have you could take a psychic action to score points and make that almost completely unstoppable. So the points become reliable, and then also cast one of those buffs that you're relying on, or debuffs, maybe Will of Assyrian or Fortune or Doom or whatever. So it's going to open up a lot of new play styles, and I suspect that at least in certain types of lists, that's going to be a go-to stratagem, one of the ones that you always have at the forefront of your mind and is very much at our fingertips. It's really excellent. It also has good synergy with Eldritch Storm, which we'll get to at the end of the stratagems, but that's a stratagem that, well, we'll get there. Good synergy. The Phoenix Reborn, 1 CP. If one of your Phoenix Lords is killed, which is pretty hard to do now because they can no longer take more than 3 damage in a single phase, and they have pretty good defenses, so it's hard to take out a Phoenix Lord. But once one of them does eventually die, for 1 CP, you can roll a d6, and on a 4+, it just resurrects, not within engagement range of an enemy, but as close as possible as you can put it, with D3 wounds remaining. You can use this multiple times per battle, but not on the same Phoenix Lord. It's so good. I mean, it's a 4+, so it's a big gamble. Totally worth it for 1 CP. It would be amazing if it were 3+ or 2+ or something, but it's super solid. It makes those Phoenix Lords even stickier and even more worth taking. I think it's going to be standard in a lot of competitive lists to have at least 1 Phoenix Lord, and if so, you're going to be using this at least once per game. Unless the Phoenix Lord just survives, which also could happen. The Avatar Resurgent. We had this before. This no longer just resurrects the Avatar in melee, so that's sad. Instead, it's a fight on death ability, and you add 2 to the model's attack characteristic, which is good. And the Avatar of Cain does not have a declining weapon skill, so he's still hitting on 2s. Again, 2 CP, but it does, if you make the big investment in the Avatar and you can get it to melee, it does guarantee that it's going to do something for you. It's a valuable tool for those of you who are building around an Avatar. I love the Avatar. I'll definitely be bringing it to some games. I'm not totally convinced yet about whether or not it's, except in maybe some very boutique builds, super competitive, but it's good now. It's definitely better than it was. We will talk about it. Battle Psychers. This is cool. It's also situational. It costs 2 CP. It allows a Warlock's unit from your army that contains 4 or more models to manifest a psychic power from the runes of Battle Discipline and have both effects trigger. So because it requires 4 or more Warlocks, it means it doesn't work on Skyrunner Warlocks because those units now max out at 3. So you can only do this with Footlocks, and you have to still have at least 4 alive. But potentially, you could cast Protect on something and Jinx on something else. I think that the Conceal Reveal, also subtly good. I mean, there are a bunch. They're all solid. They really are. But one of the tricks that I'm most excited about this, I mentioned in a previous video, Embolden Horrify, and Horrify has additional bonuses now. I think it's a Fight Last effect, but Horrify now puts -2 on your opponent's leadership characteristic, and Embolden puts +2 on the leadership characteristic of a friendly unit. So if you're planning to use Mind War, having a Warlock Conclave running around with a Farseer with Mind War, well, you can crank the Farseer's leadership to 11 and reduce the leadership of the target from Mind War by 2. So against some enemy character that normally has an 8, now that character's on a 6, your Farseer's on an 11, and there are numerous ways to get your Farseer to a 12. So at that point, we both roll a d6 and add our leadership value. Even if I just tie your roll, I do 5 or 6 mortal wounds to you. And if I beat it, I mean, you could do some serious damage with this. Denial is still obviously an issue. One of those psychic rolls can fail because there are a number of moving parts to this, and because you can only do it on footlocks, and long bomb footlock powers are gone now. There's no more stratagem that increases the range of the Warlock casts. I think it probably is a little too finicky to be a really competitive move, but man, in Crusade play and sort of pseudo-competitive casual games, this is going to be a super fun and super powerful trick. Champion of the Aeldari. All of the new codexes have something like this. This is just an opportunity to give a Warlord trait to another HQ unit that's not actually our Warlord. There will be many circumstances in which you want to do this. I think there's kind of an obvious pick for this one. We haven't gotten to Warlord traits yet, but if nothing else, there's a Warlord trait called Seer of the Shifting Vector that lets you get a command point back every time. So you roll a d6 for each command point that you spend and each command point that your opponent spends. And for every 6, you get 1 back. And for these sorts of powers, you can generally not get back more than 1 per turn. But there's just kind of no reason that you wouldn't use Champion of the Aeldari to give that ability to a second character if it's a character that's likely to stay alive, because it's going to cost you 1 CP to do it. And on average, you're going to get 2 or 3 CP back per game for doing it. So it's just kind of a way to buy CP, unless you get extraordinarily unlucky and then you lose a CP. Not that big a deal. Treasures of the Elder, and maybe they're all. I'm not saying there are not other options for that. I'm just saying that's kind of like an obvious. If you're not doing anything else with it, it makes sense to do that with it in pretty much every game. Treasures of the Aeldari. You get to choose another relic, and we have some good relics this time around. So giving a relic to another HQ unit might really be worth doing. We'll talk about that when we get to the relics. Relics of the Shrines, 1 CP. This is cool. Finally, your sergeant level characters, our exarchs, can take relics designed specifically for exarchs. And it's a mixed bag. Some of the exarch relics are really not good. Some of them are very good. And when we do the data sheets, when I talk about the data sheets for individual Aspect Warrior Shrines, we'll also talk about Aspect Warrior powers and their potential relic options. Some of them really are very good. I think this is a great investment, not least of all because when you take this once, you can give relics to 2 exarchs. So even though the exarch relics tend to be not quite as powerful as the Warlord relics, the fact that you can take 2 of them really puts it over the edge. It's really solid. Seer Council. Seer Council has changed. It has been nerfed. So now, in order to use Seer Council, it's got to be a Warlock conclave, not a singleton Warlock. It has to have 2 or more models. And you do it before the battle begins, and as long as your Farseer stays within range of those 2 Warlocks, that is within 3 inches, that's range, your Farseer gets +1 to psychic casts. It is no longer the case that you can give the +1 both to a Warlock and a Farseer. And so in that sense, it's a nerf. Although before, you had to spend a CP every turn to do this, and now you spend 1 at the beginning of the game. It's good. You're often going to want to do it. I will warn you, though, if you in games against Tau, or really any army, other Craftworld Eldar, any army with good indirect fire, don't bother. Because Warlock conclaves don't have access to Lookout Sir. They're Warlocks are elites now, and even before Warlock conclaves, even though they were in an HQ slot, did not have the character keyword. So if you have a couple of footlocks running around with a footwart Farseer empowering your foot Farseer, you better believe your opponent is going to dedicate a little bit of indirect fire to just killing them. They've got a 4-up invuln, but they've only got a couple of wounds. They're not likely to stick around. So I think this is, you know, you get to the table, you look at your opponent's army, and if it looks like you can keep your footlocks alive, it's probably worth spending a CP on this. If it looks like you can't, or you just don't have footlocks, then obviously you're not using it. Linked fire. This is cool. It's cool for a couple reasons. First of all, fire prisms are now worth taking, even if you're not planning to use linked fire. Maybe if you know, they're not an auto include, but they're good. And you no longer need 3 of them to make them work. Now with 2 fire prisms, potentially, not only are they worth taking, even if you're not going to use linked fire, but with linked fire, suddenly they do a really cool thing. So here's what linked fire does now. In your shooting phase, you select 1 fire prism from your army, and then you select 1 to 2 other fire prisms within 12 inches and visible to it. And then, when you shoot the focused lance profile only of the prism cannon, that's the, you know, Titan killer that hits ridiculously hard, that model makes 2 additional attacks with that weapon using the focused lance profile for each other fire prism model. Now, that profile is heavy too, so essentially what you're doing is you're making the same number of attacks that you would make if each prism fired independently, but you're doing all the attacks from a single prism, which has a benefit that I'll address in just a moment. And invulnerable saving throws cannot be made against attacks made by that model with that weapon. So that's crazy good, because the AP on the prism cannon is completely insane. It will go through any armor. And so you can guarantee that anything you shoot with the prism cannon will have absolutely no save. It could have some kind of feel no pain save, but no armor save. Because with an AP of -5, even on a 2-up save, they don't have a save. And if it ignores invuln saves, then they don't have a save. So this is a way to completely eliminate an opponent's ability to roll save dice. And then the prism cannon, it does a lot of, it does 3D, it's strength 14. It does 3d3 damage now. So if you have even a couple of fire prisms shooting something with 4 prism cannon shots, wounding almost anything strength 7 or less on a 2-up, anything else on a 3-up, doing 3d3 damage and ignoring everything. I mean, that's a crap load of damage. It's so good. The reason that I say it matters whether or not, the reason that it matters to have all the shots going through the single prism, it's harder than it used to be to grant rerolls to vehicles, and it's especially hard to grant a lot of rerolls to one vehicle. So if you were running your prism as Baal-Tan or Ulthway, you could, as an Ulthway player, reroll 1 wound die per unit, and as a Baal-Tan player, 1 hit die. And so that sounds like an argument for having the prisms shoot independently, but you get access to linked fire. And the other thing that you can do is, if you have a crystal targeting matrix on one of them, the one that you're planning to shoot with, well, then you're ignoring any and all hit modifiers for all of the shots instead of just from that one prism. And I think even more importantly, vectored engines now, they give battle focus to a vehicle for a single turn per game. You'd like burn them out in order to make a battle focus move. So if you have a couple of fire prisms, you can perform the following trick. You move 1 fire prism into line of sight of the enemy, just barely. You shoot the target with your prism cannon, and you trigger the shots from both fire prisms through that one prism, and then you burn out your vectored engines to make a battle focus move totally out of line of sight and make it invulnerable to the enemy. And then on the next turn, you do that same thing with the other prism. And remember, you can get around the issue with not having rerolls by using fate dice, right? So your strands of fate dice, you can guarantee a hit roll. And you can always use a command reroll too here and there if you need to. It's few enough shots that it makes sense. So this is a really powerful tool. It's a great play against invulns. I imagine using it on things like Custodes bikes will be enormously effective. Obviously, feel no pain saves can still matter, but 3d3 damage, that's a lot of damage. So this is if you're planning to play with prisms, this is a really good tool. Feigned Retreat basically does what it used to do. You can still shoot or charge or both even after you fall back. But now it costs 1 CP if you just do one of those things and 2 CP if you do both. Great Craft Worlds trick. We love our mobility. There's all sorts of circumstances in which this is a great bonus. It's also the reason, one of the reasons why I'm not totally sold on the Samhan power. So one of the Samhan have two sub-faction bonuses. One is you get to reroll all your charges. The other is you can fall back and charge. And the fact that you can do that, if anybody can do that with one unit anyway for a CP, is yet another one of the reasons why I don't think that. I don't think that's one of the more competitive picks. Forewarned, 2 CP. We know what it does. It still does the same thing. You select a craft world unit in your army within 12 inches of a Farseer, and if your opponent deep strikes something that you can see that is within 18 inches of the eligible shooting unit, your Farseer can say, in a moment, Fire Prism, an enemy unit of Terminators will materialize there, and your Prism gets to take a shot at it at its full profile, no penalties to hit. Great tool against enemy deep strikers, kind of expensive, relies on you having a backline Farseer, but there's going to be certainly circumstances in which it's a great use of CP. Tears of Isha has gotten better. It costs 1 or 2 CP, and it restores D3 wounds to a Wraith construct, and if you're within 6 inches of a Spirit Seer, they just auto gain 3 wounds instead. If you use it on a Wraith Knight, or I guess any Titanic Wraith unit, if it's some Forge World thing, it's 2 CP. Otherwise, it costs 1 CP. Really good on Wraith Seers and Spirit Seers. At 1 CP, it's even worth using on Wraithguard or Wraithblades in circumstances in which you've got a clutch unit of those in a key position. Fire and Fade. Use the stratagem in your shooting phase. After one of your Space Elf units makes an attack, you can immediately make a normal move of up to 7 inches. It's 2 CP. So that's steep now, but it's super good. Normal move up to 7 inches. That gives us the Eldar movement shenanigans that we know and love. Until the end of turn, this unit is not eligible to declare a charge. That's the same as before. And units with battle focus cannot then also make a battle focus move, because that would be insane. Now notice that you can use Matchless Agility and Fire and Fade in the same turn. So the reasons that both exist, right? One, Fire and Fade is 1 more CP, but it's 7 inches, not 6 inches, and you can use it on units that don't have battle focus. So you can use it on tanks, essentially. You can use it on vehicles, and vehicles don't typically have battle focus, so you can't use Matchless Agility on those. So you're paying an extra CP for greater flexibility and an extra inch, and the ability potentially to use them both on the same turn. Really good tool, kind of expensive. Phantasm, amazing. If Phantasm has not been a cornerstone of your go-to stratagem options, it probably ought to be. It's even better now. I will say, against savvy opponents, oftentimes you don't actually need to use Phantasm. They just kind of need to know that you have it. But I think that with the new codex, we're going to be using it more. Here's what it does. At the start of the first battle round, but before the first turn begins, so after you know who's going first, you can select up to 3 of your units. And also, if you're running Harlequins in your Asuryani list, which is the thing you can do now, traveling players, you can take a detachment, a Harlequin patrol detachment alongside your craft worlders and pay no CP to do it, if it's a single patrol. So you can select up to 3 units of Asuryani Harlequins or Yunari. You just pick them up and redeploy them. Now, if the mission uses strategic reserve rules, you can also just stick them into strategic reserves without paying CP for only 2 CP. This is so freaking good. The obvious there's so many good ways to use this, but one of the obvious go-to tricks is to take some striking scorpions, which now can forward deploy 9 inches from your opponent's deployment zone, set them up to just mug your opponent on turn 1, and then if you don't get first turn, you just pick them up and do something else with them depending on the board state and what you're up against. Maybe you put them into reserves, and then you bring them in, and maybe you put them elsewhere on the board and you use them to screen. But it's so good. It's so good. Eldritch Storm. This is the stratagem that allows you to do something like orbital bombardment that's way better. I already talked about this in a previous video, so I'm going to rush it a little bit. You choose a point within 24 inches of the Farseer, and in your next psychic phase, you do this in your command phase, so this happens all in the same turn, which is key. In your next psychic phase, you can attempt, if you want, to have your Farseers empower the Eldritch Storm. So it's a psychic action, warp charge value 5, and then in your shooting phase, the Eldritch Storm takes effect. You roll a d6 for every enemy unit within 6 inches of the marker that you placed, the center of that marker. And for every 2 up, if it's an infantry non-character, or if it's an infant, well, if it's a character, if it's a unit that's not an infantry character, on a 2+, it suffers d3 mortal wounds. If it is an infantry character, then it's on a 4+. But and at +1 mortal wound for each time you used Empower. So this is, you're not going to use this in every game, but it is, in the games where you do use it when it's appropriate, it's potentially very, very powerful. Because if there are 3 or 4 enemy units clustered together, and you're doing d3 damage to probably all of them, maybe d3 +1. And if you use the multifaceted mind stratagem, you can have your Farseer that's, so maybe your Farseer has, for example, 2 psychic powers, one of which is offensive and one of which is a buffing power. And you use your buffing power, and then you don't even really have room for it. There's no target for your other cast anyway. You could use Eldritch Storm, use multifaceted minds to still be able to cast the power that you need, choose a target for Eldritch Storm, empower it, and then do d3 +1 damage, like some form of mini super smite to 3 different enemy units, especially units that are clustered on an objective or in a matchup in which the mission requires your opponent to hold the center of the board. This could be really powerful. Again, there are going to be matchups in which there just aren't any good targets, and there are going to be matchups in which you just don't have the CP for this. It's so expensive. But remembering that it exists, remembering that it's there as an option, with multifaceted mind, it's 4 CP. So, I mean, this is big resource-intensive move here. But it is a wonderful tool to have in your back pocket. And the fact that it happens in your shooting phase is big, because it means that your opponent can't dodge it the way we can dodge a Space Marine orbital barrage. Webway strike. We know what Webway strike does. I don't think it's changed at all. If you spend a CP, you can select up to 1 unit, stick it in the Webway, and then deep strike it anywhere outside of 9. If you spend 3 CP, you can do it with 2 units. It's a rare game in which I don't have at least 1 unit. Usually it's 1 unit. 3 CP ends up getting too rich for me, but I almost always have a single unit at least coming in out of the Webway. In this new version of the Codex, I think there's lots of great options for Webway units. Banshees coming out of the Webway with Ghost Walk and potentially Strands of Fate dice to guarantee that they succeed on their charge. That's super powerful. I think Wraith Guard with those cannons, I think they're going to have some play this time around. I really do. That's a pretty solid move. There are lots of good options for this. Wire Weave Grenades, 1 CP. It's a fun thing Shroud Runners can do. So you select an enemy unit within 12 inches of your Shroud Runners, and you roll a d3. The enemy unit suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the result, maximum of 1 mortal wound per model in the enemy unit. And then also, until the end of the phase, you subtract the result from the enemy unit's move characteristic. And until the end of the phase, your opponent must subtract the result from charge rolls made. Now, on its own, I mean, it's worth it just to do the mortal wounds. In terms of the movement shenanigans, on its own, it's not a ton, but we actually now have a bunch of ways to limit an opponent's ability to move or charge. So if, for example, you use the Runes of Battle to cast Restrain on a unit, and then you also hit it with a Wire Weave Grenade, and then maybe you even also have some Warp Spiders nearby using the Exarch power that makes them unchargeable, or it creates a penalty if someone's trying to charge them in terrain, or your Ranger units with the Wire Weave Net, which subtracts 2 from them. You could put your opponent into a situation in which they're at like -6 to charge anything and they struggle to move at all. We have a lot more ways to interfere with opponents' movement than we used to. And I think if you're planning to stack this with other movement penalties, potentially it's actually ridiculously powerful. And I think this might be a thing that people are not immediately picking up on. That said, any stratagem that involves, or any battle tactic that involves multiple CP expenditures and a bunch of units to be alive to contribute their moving parts is always a little bit tenuous. Okay, shield discharge. 1 CP, it's changed. This is still a thing that your Wave Serpent does, although this is phrased in an interesting way. Any model from your army equipped with a Serpent Shield or a Wave Serpent Shield, so presumably, oh, I think actually, somebody out there can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think actually that might be a reference to the new Storm Guardian Dragon Scale thing. I think I'm 99% on that, so it isn't just the Wave Serpent anymore. The way the shield discharge works is now you spend a CP, and the enemy within 12 inches cannot declare Overwatch, cannot set to defend, and every time a model in that unit makes a melee attack, subtract 1 from the hit roll. Basically, you do to the opponent's unit what your Banshees do automatically anyway to opponents' units, and after you've done it, you don't have the Serpent Shield anymore. It's good, and there might be circumstances in which you want to do it. I could imagine using it in conjunction, for example, with some Striking Scorpions, or potentially even if you had some units of Shining Spears jumping in. But I certainly don't see myself using this in every game. But it's solidly situational. The Swooping Hawk Grenade Pack is a stratagem now, and it's way better. Remember how tragic it used to be, where you'd roll a d6 for either every Hawk or every opponent's model, whichever number was lower, and then you did a mortal wound on a 6? Well, it's way better now. When your Swooping Hawks make a normal move or advance, and they travel over an enemy model, you roll a d6 for each model in the Swooping Hawk unit, as it should always have been, subtracting 1 if the selected enemy unit has a character keyword, excluding vehicles or monsters, and for every 4+, the enemy takes 1 mortal wound to a maximum of 6. This is, thank you. This is always what it should have been. So your Swooping Hawks jump over something, and they inflict mortal wounds on average equal to half the models in your Swooping Hawk unit. Swooping Hawks, by the way, are maybe aesthetically, spiritually, and even in terms of just the satisfaction of seeing them charge across the table, Howling Banshees remain my favorite Aspect Warrior, but Swooping Hawks were my first favorite Aspect Warrior back when I started playing this game when I was a kid, and they're really good now. And this is just yet another way in which they've got real play. The Starhawk Missile for 1 CP. Use this stratagem in your shooting phase when an Asuryani model from your unit targets an aircraft unit with a missile launcher. You make 1 attack, you add 1 to the attack's hit roll, and if you hit, you do 2d3 mortal wounds and the attack sequence ends. It's just a great trick to have in your back pocket against opposing aircraft. It's better than it used to be. It does, I mean, that's 2d3 with +1 to hit. That's super solid. If you're running if you have a missile launcher and your opponent is using aircraft, you're going to probably use this, but that's probably not going to happen in every matchup. Resonator Shard. This one is cool. Interesting. I'm curious to see how it plays out. So in your shooting phase, when a unit from your army that contains any models equipped with a D-Cannon, Doomweaver, or Shadow Weaver is selected to shoot, until the end of phase, each time an attack is made by a model in that unit equipped with a D-Cannon, Doomweaver, or Shadow Weaver that targets an enemy unit within 12 inches of a friendly Resonator Shard unit, it actually says units, which is funny because there's only 1, Rangers, you can re-roll the hit roll. So essentially, you pay 1 CP and you can give guide to either a Night Spinner or a unit of support platform weapons if the enemy unit is within 12 inches of one of your ranger units. And this is, it's situational, it's a little bit funky, but I will say that Night Spinner's got a big upgrade. They have -2 AP now, but it's way harder to give rerolls to vehicles. And although there are kind of ways around that for some vehicles, like the Fire Prisms, you can use Strands of Fate, but because of the volume of fire on the Night Spinners, obviously if you're attacking a big unit and you get your blast off, that's 12 shots. Night Spinners really want to rely on volume of fire, so using Strands of Fate to auto hit with one of those is like not a major game changer. What you want is what you used to be able to do, which is you cast Guide on it and you reroll all the dice. And if it's Bel-10, you used to be able to like cast Guide on one and use the Bel-10 Warlock trait on the other, and they could both reroll all their dice. Or you had an autark nearby and expert crafters, and you did all your 1s and 1/2. There were all these tricks, and those tricks are gone. So this is a way to get the rerolls back, and I really think it's specifically going to be for units of Shadow Weavers and Night Spinners, where you're rolling lots of dice. Because again, I mean, don't get me wrong. If you have a unit of 3D cannons, this is awesome. But but there are other ways to get rerolls with the D. Well, also, to be fair, there were other ways to get rerolls also with the Shadow Weavers, and that's because it has the Guardian keyword. You may remember you can reroll ones anyway. But this is good, and I think the Night Spinners really are the primary target for this. And if you have a unit of Rangers in place and there's a viable target, I think you're definitely going to want to do it. I am a little skeptical about this being a combo that we rely on, because your opponent will get wise and just make a point of killing your Rangers, and that's not that hard to do, or just keeping the most important targets more than 12 inches away from the Rangers. I think this will have special relevance for Autark, because they have a way to essentially deep strike Rangers with their I think it's a Warlord trait. I talked about it in my last video, but they have a way to bring in a group of Rangers out of deep strike, and that's got great synergy with this. But for the rest of us, you could spend a CP and deep strike some Rangers. I think it's too finicky and too weirdly not super reliable to be a core part of our planning, but it's an interesting tool to have. Fusion charges. When a Fire Dragon's unit from your army is selected to fight, for 1 CP, select a model in that unit. And if you hit the vehicle unit that you targeted, if it's a vehicle unit, suffers 2d3 mortal wounds, and that's it. So it's just, your Fire Dragons are already doing tons of damage, but this is a way to get some extra attacks around an invuln save. This is one of our many funky ways to get around invuln saves, and in that sense, I think it's pretty good. You know, if you have a team of Fire Dragons leaping out of a Falcon, 6 Fire Dragons leap out of a Falcon. Falcons can deep strike even turn 1 now, and the unit inside can get out right away. They shoot something. Theoretically, if there's an invuln, this is a way to guarantee you do some extra damage. That's it. Okay, the rest of the stratagems are Harlequin stratagems, and so I'm going to leave it there until I eventually talk about Harlequins in a later video, and we're going to move on to relics. I already talked about sub-faction specific relics in part 1 of this video, and a bunch of those are good. But even if you've already decided that you're definitely taking your sub-faction relic, the general relics in the book are relevant, because now we have that stratagem that lets us take a second relic, and there's some great options here. In fact, we've gone from, in the 8th edition codex, having arguably the worst relics in the whole game, to, in the 9th edition codex, having a bunch of great options. In fact, some of the stuff here that's better than anything we had before still isn't good enough that you're likely to end up taking it in competitive play, and that is exciting. That is an exciting improvement. We will start with what is arguably the worst of these, but I could still imagine being valuable under certain circumstances. Kurnus' bow is a relic shuriken pistol that has the problem that it is a relic pistol, and this is 40k, and oftentimes those aren't great. But it has a range of 18 inches, so that's cool. Way better range than pistols. It's pistol 3, strength 5, and when it wounds something, there's just no armor save. Your opponent just takes a mortal wound, doesn't get to make an armor save, invuln or otherwise. And that's cool. And in combination with other tricky tricks that let you just ignore armor, potentially you could put a bunch of mortal wounds on something. But on its own, it's not, it's not earth-shattering. It's solid. And if we didn't have other good stuff, I would say that's a really good option. But we have lots of really good stuff, so I don't see this making the grade. The Phoenix Gem. The Phoenix Gem is really good, and I think it's better than it used to be. Some people may argue that it's a lateral move. Certainly for my playstyle, it's better. So you may remember that what the Phoenix Gem used to do is when the bearer died, you'd roll a d6 for each unit within, I think, 3 inches, and on a 2+, that unit would take D3 mortal wounds. And as long as the bear inflicted some mortal wounds, it would resurrect outside of engagement range and live to fight another day. The downside to that, right, you only have the resurrection ability if you're on top of another unit, and potentially it does mortal wounds to your own units. There was a fun opportunity to use a Warlock Skyrunner as like essentially a suicide torpedo late in the game, where you intentionally get killed with it and melee, resurrect it, do mortal wounds to something on top of the Witchblade damage, and that was neat. But opponents could, in some cases, play around it just by moving away and then killing the HQ model. So the way it works now is, again, when the bear dies, you roll a d6, and on a 2+, the model resurrects. At the end of the phase, and with D3 wounds remaining, and that's it. There's no business about needing to be near other models or doing mortal wounds. So this is good for I think better for the simple reason that it is a more reliable resurrection ability, and it's so powerful, right? You significantly increase the durability of any HQ unit that can take relics. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. I also like that it's the end of the phase, which means that your opponent cannot, for example, shoot the bear, kill it, let it resurrect, and shoot it with something else. It sort of guarantees that model will survive that phase. That's very powerful and definitely has potential. Okay, the Shard of Anaris. This is so cool. So there are 2 relic swords. Both are way better than the old relic swords, and I think both are playable, although I'm going to say that I think Shard of Anaris might actually be the weaker of the 2, but it's still very cool. Here's what it does. It replaces either a Starglaive or a Banshee Blade, and it provides +1 strength, -3 AP, only flat 1 damage, but the bear makes D3 + 3 additional attacks. That's great. So the autark carrying it around now has between, let's see, 9 and 12 attacks. That's so good. The thing that I think keeps it from being totally amazing is I don't know of a combo that will let you nudge up the damage profile. So your autark with its weapon skill of 2 can become a total blender against certainly light infantry, right? You could jump into the middle of any squad of lightly armored T4 or 3 enemy infantry and just lay them out, or even well armored, right? I mean, power armor would only save on a 6 against this. Anything with multiple wounds, right, will be able to absorb a certain amount of this damage, but it's still it's really good. That is a very solid relic sword. That the sheer volume of attacks is good. That said, I think when we get to the Fire Saber, we'll see some reasons to think that maybe that's the preferable pick. Falchu's Wing. I love Falchu's Wing. And I love that Falchu's Wing is still in the book for 2 reasons. One, it's just a fabulously well-optimized way to increase the movement range of a foot Farseer, or frankly a foot autark without buying a bike. And then selfishly, I like this because I have a foot Farseer modeled with Falchu's Wing that is in fact, I think, some metal Swooping Hawk wings off of I think it's a 3rd edition Swooping Hawk Exarch, and I want to be able to continue using that model. So selfishly, I like it just for that reason. But Falchu's Wing is not only still in the book, but it's better. It still provides the fly keyword and a movement characteristic of 12, but it now also comes with a souped-up Swooping Hawk grenade pack that, unlike the actual Swooping Hawk grenades, does not cost CP to use. At the end of your movement phase, you can select 1 enemy unit that the bearer moved over, roll a d6, and on a 2+, the unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. That's great. It's not a reason you're going to take Falchu's Wing. You're not going to buy it specifically because you want the grenade pack, but it's certainly a nice bonus. And there are a lot of ways in this book to stack up mortal wounds sort of subtly from a whole bunch of different origins. And I think that's something the 8th Ed Codex wanted to be able to do, but couldn't get there reliably. And the 9th Ed Codex, you could definitely build for death by 1,000 cut mortal wound play, and this is just yet another thing that would add to that. Super cool. I think especially in lists where you're trying to find ways to get just a few more points, instead of putting your Farseer on a jet bike, you use Falchi's Wing. Or frankly, instead of giving your autark the Swooping Hawk wings, which cost 25 points and do not have the Sky Leap ability that Swooping Hawks have. They used to. If you look at the Eldritch Omens datasheet, it's clear. So let me pause for a minute and explain a thing that happened. Some of you may have noticed in your Eldritch Omens box that the gear options for the autark are just straight up better than what turned out to be in the actual codex. And I think there's only one explanation for this, and that is that the datasheet for Eldritch Omens was printed at a time when they thought they were done playtesting, but then they weren't done playtesting. And I kind of wonder if maybe when Drukhari did really well, this book has been done for a while, and I think maybe when Drukhari did really well, and it's possible that GW tried to nerf Eldar beyond what they had planned to do, even after all of the playtesting, nerf Craft Worlds, that is, in order to prevent having to have a day one FAQ. And so you'll see that it used to be the case that the Swooping Hawk wings gave the autark the Swooping Hawk power, and it used to be the case that the Banshee Mask also inflicted -1 to the attack characteristic of the unit that you're engaged with, and it used to be the case that the Warp Spider Death Spinner just auto hit like a flamer, and there may also be others. All of that is gone. And so instead of paying 25 points for Swooping Hawk wings that just really increase your movement characteristic and give you the ability to deep strike sudden assault, you could get Falchi's Wing and save yourself 25 points. It's not necessarily a bad move. And because unlike autarks, Farseers can't take Swooping Hawk wings natively, it's also good for that reason. So this is anything that increases the mobility for a Craft Worlds army is usually a solid plan because we rely on mobility to win games. So this is a strong relic option. The Fire Saber, the better, I think better of the two relic swords. It's strength +3, so now instead of coming in at strength 4, you're coming in at strength 6. There's a big difference between those two. -4 AP, flat 2 damage, also replaces the Banshee Sword or the Starglaive. And by the way, thank you, Games Workshop. Thank you for making it not just the Banshee Blade and trying to create a situation where if you're not taking a relic, you are building an autark with a Starglaive, and then you make us buy another relic to have the sword to be able to take the relics. Thank you for not doing that. I appreciate it. That's big of you. In addition to the better stats, on a 6, on an unmodified hit roll of 6, the Fire Saber inflicts a mortal wound. So you're at 5 attacks, not potentially 9 to 12 attacks, but you're going straight through just about any armor that's not an invuln save. You're much more likely to wound, and flat 2 damage is just going to be better against heavy infantry, or frankly, if your autark is going to fight heavy infantry, monsters, tanks, demon princes, other powerful characters, on all of those matchups, the Fire Saber will be better. And then against light 1-wound infantry, the Fire Saber will probably kill maybe 2 fewer models than the Shard of Anaris. And so I think but it will still be good, right? Partially because it will wound more often and go through armor a little better. So I think that between the two, the Fire Saber probably is the stronger pick. But there's a bigger issue here. Even though both of those are probably good relic swords, I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to fit non-bike combat autarks into lists for 2 reasons. One, so HQ slots are going to be precious in this new codex. You absolutely need a Farseer. The Phoenix Lords are so good this time around that I think we are often going to want to take a Phoenix Lord. And so then maybe you have a slot left for some kind of combat autark. The book definitely is emphasizing combat autarks. It wants you to take combat autarks. A lot of the Warlord powers are obviously for autarks. A lot of the relics can only be taken by autarks. There are all of these new build options for autarks. But the issue is this. Even though an autark is only 80 points, by the time you kit it out with either wings or a Warp Spider generator, and you are going to want one of those, and give it some sort of upgraded shooting weapon, and you probably want to, and put the Banshee Mask on it, you probably want to, you're at like 135 points if it's the Swooping Hawk wings. And that's the same price as a Phoenix Lord, pretty much. So it's not clear that it's certainly not points efficient in the way that some of the Drukhari HQs can be. You can make them combat monsters, but to do so, you have to invest pretty significantly and then probably also give them either a Warlord trait or a relic. And the Phoenix Lords can't take Warlord traits or relics, and they already come with stuff that is equivalent to that. And so I think that it's not obvious that these are necessarily going to make the grade. Here's the other problem. Any sort of foot autark with wings or a warp spider jump pack has to compete with a bike autark, which is just a cool 100 points flat and then has access to what's probably the best relic in the book. And I don't know that it's really going to make a lot of sense to seriously consider not taking the bike autark. So the best relic in the book is the next one. I think it's the best relic. Maybe I'm wrong. The Sunstorm. You can give it to any HQ character that is on a bike. So it's either a Farseer Skyrunner or an autark Skyrunner. The move here is probably an autark Skyrunner. It provides a move characteristic of 20, and the objective secured ability. Wow. Wow, that's good. First of 20 inches, that's so fast, right? And think about what it means if you advance, and then there's actually a Warlord trait you can combine this with, I'll talk about. But the real deal here is OBSEC. Being able to have a 100-point OBSEC bike autark is crazy good. And then there are ways to make it super durable. Now, I think the way to play this, right, is not to think about that 20 inches as an opportunity for a first turn blitz with your blitz tark, right? Because I suppose you could use various shenanigans to zoom across the board on turn one, slam into something with your bike tark, and get so far ahead of your army that you do a little damage and then he dies. And at 100 points, maybe you could make a worthwhile trade, but but maybe not. Maybe in combination with a bunch of striking scorpions, coming in out of deep strike, or I'm sorry, forward deploy on turn one that then move and charge, and maybe also a turn one Falcon Banshee deploy charge move with Strands of Fate. Maybe having an autark up there to let those other melee units roll ones and put overwhelming melee pressure on your opponent immediately might make sense. But I think the conventional better way to play the Sunstorm is going to be initially to be a little bit conservative with it. And then, especially on turns 3, 4, and 5, probably also on turn 2, use it to just bully your opponent off of objectives and score with it. As soon as an opponent spreads out to try to engage your Eldar, which can be anywhere, your bike autark can nip across the field to hit the unit guarding the most out of the way objective, wreck the unit, steal the objective with OBSEC, and then nip away and do that somewhere else before your opponent can retaliate. There are also, again, I've already mentioned, this has some good synergy with a Warlord trait that will make it even better. This is so freaking good. And again, it's hard to imagine wanting the winged autark when you can do this with the jetbike autark for fewer points. Aegis of Eldinesh. This is good. You can give it only to an autark, so it could be a bike or a foot tark. It gives the bearer a 2+ save, and each time an attack is allocated to the bearer, you subtract 1 from the damage characteristic. It's good. It's especially good if you give it to an Eandon autark, because Eandon, right, can ignore -1 AP and reduce -2 to -1. So an Eandon autark with this has a 2+ save anywhere on the board, and even against volume of fire, AP -1 still has a 2+ save, and you could also provide a Warlord trait that would make it even more survivable and just super sticky and hard to get rid of. In that case, maybe it might be worth giving up the Sunstorm. It's hard to imagine wanting to give up the Sunstorm. This is solid, but I definitely think there's other stuff that competes with it. And outside of an Eandon build, I don't think it necessarily has the same value. Again, compared to the stuff that was in the 8th edition Codex, this is great. It's just we have such good options now. I don't think it makes the grade. The Weeping Stones. I can imagine lists where this would be especially a good pick as a second relic you pay the CP for the extra relic. It goes to a Psyker model only, and while the bear is on the battlefield, each time you make a Strands of Fate roll, you can reroll 1 additional die. So if you give it to a Farseer, which normally gives you 1 reroll, now you have 2 rerolls. And in a list where you're really leaning into Strands of Fate, you really need Strands of Fate to work for you, this could be very important. I think in your typical Eldar, Craft World Eldar list, it might not quite get there, but it definitely has play if you build for it and around it, for sure. Okay, Warlord Traits. Again, with the Warlord Traits, I think some of the sub-faction Warlord trait options, like the BL10 one, for example, are so good that you might not be terribly tempted by these. There is one, it's the last one, that I think is essentially an auto-include as a second Warlord trait for which you pay a CP. I already mentioned this when we were talking about stratagems, and that is Seer of the Shifting Vector. So what Seer of the Shifting Vector does now, as opposed to before, is that while the Warlord is on the battlefield, anytime either you or your opponent spends a command point, you roll a d6, and on a 6, you get a command point. Now, this has been capped, so I think it's per player turn, you can't get more than 1, but maybe it's per battle round. Ooh, I'm having a crazy moment where I don't remember. But nevertheless, over the course of the game, this is typically going to be worth 2 or 3 CP. It's pretty much always going to be worth at least 1. And so it costs 1 CP to give this to like a Farseer that's likely to stay alive for pretty much the whole game anyway. There's no reason not to do that. It's just more CP in the vast majority of games that you play. It's great for that reason. That said, there's some other really good options that, as your first choice Warlord trait, you may wish to go with. The first of the generic Warlord traits that anybody can take is called Ambush of Blades. I think this is actually the weakest one. In your command phase, select 1 friendly Craft World core or Craft World character unit, and until the start of your next command phase, each time a model makes a melee attack, improve the armor penetration characteristic by 1. It sounds initially good, and it has potentially good synergy. It would stack on top of Savage Blades, so you could add, in a custom Craft World list, you could add 2 to the AP of a unit. The problem with AP powers, as I think I mentioned before, is that most of our Craft World's melee units already have crazy good AP. They already go through pretty much all armor anyway. Banshee swords are at -4, so they just ignore power armor. Laser lances on your Shining Spears are at -4, so they just ignore power armor. Ghost axes and ghost swords are at -3, so they ignore most armor, and power armor saves on a 6. I guess it could be helpful for them. The real beneficiaries of this power are striking scorpions. The problem is that your striking scorpions are likely to begin the game at the edge of your opponent's, 9 inches from your opponent's deployment zone, hoping for a turn 1 charge. And I don't think on turn 1 it's going to be terribly easy to get your Warlord close enough. I guess you could give it to the Bike Tark on the Sunstorm, right, and have him blitz across the field, but we already talked about why that blitz move maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. Oh, you know what? It wouldn't even work. Excuse me, I'm being crazy. Because you have to do it in your command phase. So there's no way on turn 1 to use this on your Scorpions. So you could use it on a unit of Scorpions another turn, or maybe a unit of Wraith Blades. It's not strong. It's not good. Don't take this one. 2, Walker of Many Paths. Once per turn, you can reroll 1 hit roll, 1 wound roll, or 1 damage roll for this Warlord. Totally solid pick on a combat autark. Again, if you're running that Bike Tark, who's going to fly around on the Sunstorm and blast opposing units off of objectives, this is a way to make your Bike Tark a little bit better at that. Obviously, you could also give it to another kind of autark with a variety of loadouts, but I don't think that's the move. Falcon's Swiftness, love it. Add 2 to the Warlord's move characteristic. This Warlord can ignore the effects of difficult ground, and each time this Warlord makes a battle focus move, do not roll a dice. Instead, this Warlord can move up to 6. So good on that Bike autark. Now its movement goes to 22 inches. Fabulous. And the battle focus move, being able to know that you can move 6, so good, right? In theory, you could also use this on like a warlord with a missile launcher who's going to hang around on your back line and step into a ruin, blat something with the missile launcher, and then step out. We talked about that battle focus trick earlier, that for the vast majority of your units in your army has a 50% chance of failing. This is a way to make that certain for the autark with the missile launcher. But I'm not really sold on the autark with the missile launcher. I think that there aren't a whole lot of backline units anymore that benefit from the reroll ones aura power, because it no longer affects vehicles and it doesn't affect platforms. And so your troops units don't have enough range to benefit from a nearby backline autark. Your Dark Reapers, which are the only long-range infantry unit now, they're just not as good as they used to be. And so I think that probably is not going to make a lot of sense to be running many Reapers. And so I'm not convinced. I think that's a cool trick. Maybe in the right build, it's the right pick, but I don't plan to use it a great deal. Fate's Messenger. Once per turn, when a saving throw is made for this warlord, if it's failed, you can change the damage characteristic of that attack to 0. I love this. I think this is so good. On the 20-inch move bike tark with OBSEC, the ability to zoom onto an objective and know that the first time you fail your invuln save when your opponent shoots it with a las cannon or something, you can just say no, the damage characteristic of that is 0, is really big. If it survives for multiple turns, you're really just adding potentially a tremendous number of wounds to the profile of your autark. I mean, this could, if you get to use this 2 or 3 times on multi-damage attacks, you're essentially increasing its durability by potentially 6 or 7 wounds. That's big. This is or more. This is really, really good. The question is whether or not it can nudge out Falcon's swiftness. Mark of the Incomparable Hunter. This is, I think, up against Walker of Many Paths for a damage boost. You may remember that the way this used to work is it allowed you to ignore the Lookout Sir roll. It doesn't let you do that anymore. What it does is it adds 1 to the strength characteristic of attacks, and an unmodified wound roll of 6 inflicts a mortal wound in addition to any normal damage. Now, I think maybe they had in mind the missile launcher autark for this, and I actually don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, yes, it gets the strength of the harder hitting missile to a 9, and so it could wound strength 8 stuff on a 3, but you're unlikely to trigger the mortal wounds, and the better move probably would be to put it on the bike tark, because the bike tark would then have 4 shuriken shots at strength 5, and the laser lance would also be hitting at increased strength, and then with 5 shots, you're statistically likely to do at least 1 mortal wound. Is that better than getting to reroll 1 hit roll, 1 wound roll, or 1 damage roll? Maybe. Totally plausible. I guess somebody's going to do the math on that for us at some point. Some math person will publish some charts. But if you want a warlord trait that's increasing the damage output for your bike tark, I think one of those probably is a pretty solid pick. But I expect on my bike tark to be using Falcon Swiftness or Fate's Messenger. And we already talked about Seer of the Shifting Vector. So there are a lot of really solid relics, and there are some good warlord traits. There are some great warlord traits available to individual factions, and a lot of opportunity to build out your characters for whatever you need them to do in your list. If you're not going with a combat autark, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with giving your Farseer, Skyrunner, Shifter, Seer of the Shifting Vector, and either the Spirit Stone or maybe even the Sunstorm, and calling it good. I think that the Farseer Skyrunner with the Sunstorm, everybody's going to be initially really taken with the autark using this. I actually think the Farseer on the Sunstorm is a really solid pick, especially again in late game. Turns 4 and 5, when there's not enough on the board that your Farseer is really likely to be killed, even in turn 3 to back up some infantry on a midfield objective while still making use of Lookout Sir. I think there's real play for the Farseer on the bike also. So there it is. Solid options, very exciting. I will be back hopefully tomorrow with a rundown of the new psychic powers and also our secondary missions, and then we'll dive into data sheets after that, and hopefully by the end of the week we'll be through the whole codex, at least in the first pass, and we'll start in on other stuff. If you liked this video, please consider clicking a like. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. If you have your own thoughts about stratagems, about relics, about warlord traits, please leave those in the comments below. Or if you just want to say hello to help out my algorithm and to say hello, I also appreciate that. That's it, guys. I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Take care. Bye.